Charles Pop on YouTube. So, as the title says, I read the Communist Manifesto. So what did I think? Well, strap in, because we're about to find out.
Start a revolution now!
So, this book is incredibly important, no matter your opinion on communism. In fact, I would say this is probably the most important political book of the last 200 years. So many regimes and groups have been inspired by this. This is the Bible of leaders like Vladimir Lenin, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Mao Zedong, and Joseph Stalin, to name a couple. Okay, so this book was written in 1848 by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. I think I'm saying that right. It was published widely in English, French, German, Italian, Danish, and Flemish languages. That's what it says at the front of the book. Anyway, so as this is not a fiction book, this video is going to be a lot more serious, and I'm going to go through the book chapter by chapter, so let's just slap into it. Chapter 1, The Bourgeoisie and Proletariat. So this chapter lays the foundations of communism. It's a very interesting read, and is honestly way ahead of its time. To be honest, this chapter, at least at the start, is pretty based, and raises a lot of concerns that people still have with the state of the world. I found myself agreeing with the book almost wholeheartedly for the first, 15 pages or so. Basically, the book claims that all of human life is a class struggle. Historically, that has looked like many different things: lords and serfs, masters and slaves, etc., etc. However, it is saying that now, because of globalism and hypercapitalism that was spawned from the Industrial Revolution and the colonization of America, these old-school hierarchies are being eroded to be replaced by the bourgeoisie. Basically, they are the hypercapitalist master class that gets steadily smaller and smaller. The manifesto posits that whereas in the past workers were valued because of their skills and labour, that now with the advent of industry, workers are seen more like soldiers than craftsmen. Workers are slowly losing their livelihoods to machines, and no longer are they working a trade or family business. Now they are herded into factories and forced to just produce for the capitalist system. What a prophetic book. I mean, I'm being completely unironic here, actually. And now the proletariat are crushed by a desire for money. All institutions are crumbling under the desire for money, and now all that happens is that the worker works to make money so they can pay more bourgeoisie like landlords to live. It also says that the bourgeoisie will erode the culture of the countries and towns by importing everything, as money incentivizes trade and globalization. All culture is destroyed and replaced by a love of money. The bourgeoisie will import anything that is cheaper and will start competing with each other in this way. This also forces the workers, who used to work together, to now work against one another. Wages go down, profit is valued more than work, they will import stuff if it's cheaper elsewhere and destroy jobs. Jobs will be replaced by machines, the workers now fight each other, desperately trying to work faster and cheaper, and to get into the bourgeoisie class. However, it also says that capitalism breeds the seeds of its own destruction. In order to be competitive monetarily, it raises up its workers, gives them education and skills and the like, and soon the bourgeoisie start to fight each other for more money. They will begin to destroy the middle and lower class, the shopkeepers and such. They will either manage to rise up and become rich or fall into the proletariat. The book says that this will eventually reach a critical mass and that revolution will start to form in the lower classes. This will reach a tipping point when a group of bourgeoisie realise that they are getting screwed by the higher bourgeoisie and jump ship into the revolution. The revolution will also pick up what the book refers to as scum, who are like the bottom feeders, who aren't working class, like the council estate types, who feel a lot of the grievances of the proletariat but don't actually contribute in any meaningful way. All of this is observable, and most people I know actually agree with this. Globalization is a net negative for everyday workers, automation is a net negative for everyday workers, our cultures and identities are being eroded and destroyed by capitalist greed, everything is becoming completely focused on money and material. This book is either hella ahead of its time, or nothing has changed in 200 years. Bit of both. So this is where it starts to lose me. So going back to the traitor bourgeoisie, it says that there are two types of people now fighting the bourgeoisie. The revolutionaries, who are the communists, they want to move the world forward, they want to do away with the classes and private property and all that stuff. However, the lower bourgeoisie that get kicked out of the club are conservatives or counter-revolutionaries. They have the same immediate goal of destroying the bourgeoisie, but they want to take things back to how it was before, back when shopkeepers and tradesmen were valued and were not under the heel of hypercapitalism. Back when they were on top, effectively. So this is actually quite fascinating, because we recently hit this. This is happening now. For years we've had the revolutionaries, communists or whatever they call themselves. I'm strictly talking about in the West here. I understand that many countries had or have communist revolutions, but I'm talking strictly in the Western world. And, these revolutionary types that are always talking about destroying capitalism, etc., etc., we've heard it a billion times. However, recently we've actually hit the counter-revolutionaries I believe Marx was talking about, with the rise of what's sort of been dubbed right-wing populism. This is what Marx was kind of warning about. People who kind of join the revolution. They have similar rhetoric and point out all the same injustices and problems, however their end goal is the opposite of the communists. They want things to go back to the good old days, not to move forward like the communists want. So there is an obvious example of this, but I'm first going to talk about another one that's a little closer to home. So in my country of Canada,
I like drinking beer and smoking cigarettes.
We are seeing the rise of right-wing populism under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre. He is talking about all the stuff that left-wing parties normally do. People losing jobs, high prices of living, etc., etc. However, he is going about it in a different way. And he's actually poaching a lot of the voter base of these sort of trashy alt-left parties like the NDP that do nothing but talk, but still suck up to big government, big business, and the globalist agenda. Sorry, my biases are starting to show. I'll try and rein them in, but you get my point. However, the real patient zero for this is actually the 2016 American presidential election.
America, fuck yeah!
You had two radicals running here. You had Bernie Sanders and you had Donald Trump. If you go back and look at it, they were actually very similar to each other. All the issues they talked about were basically the same. The difference is that Bernie was a progressive while Trump was a conservative. Bernie wanted to move forward into the communist utopia, and Trump wanted to make America great again and take us back to the good old days. This is the divide that Marx and Engels predicted. However, the Communist Manifesto says that these right-wing types are not a part of the revolution, they're not to be trusted, for obvious reasons. So moving on to chapter 2, Proletariat and Communists. This is where the book completely loses me.
Yeah, they had us the first half, I'm not gonna lie.
This chapter really details what communism is, and what its ends are, and what its means are, and some of the common criticisms of it, all at the same time. And this is interesting because it's all from the mouth of the communists. This isn't like some hit piece. This is from the horse's mouth. First off, it says that communists are not allied with any specific political parties that are pre-existing. The idea is that they represent all the workers of the world, regardless of nationality. They view the entire bourgeoisie as evil, worldwide, and want to facilitate a worldwide revolution. So here is an interesting thing. Not once is race mentioned. It never comes up. To Marx and Engels, race is completely unimportant. Class is the only thing that matters, which is actually really weird because modern-day Marxists, which have popped up mainly in America, but also in Canada and Western Europe in the last decade or so, completely do away with this principle. The attempt to bring communism to America failed, and so they tried to replace class with race and import it again. But this fundamentally doesn't work. The idea here, which we'll get into in a second, is that we want to unite all of humankind, and that by eliminating money, we will eliminate the bourgeoisie, and we will all become equal. This fundamentally doesn't work with race, as you cannot change your race in the way that you can change your class. For example, Marx's rhetoric is employed a lot these days when referring to minorities versus white people, whatever that nebulous term means. However, that is quite antithetical and frankly an affront to Marx. Anyone who calls themselves a communist and subscribes to this doesn't understand Marx, and I don't like Marx, but it just annoys me when imperialists like modern Americans try to take someone else's work and philosophy and make it something it isn't. But I digress. So this book literally says that the basic plan of communism is the abolition of private property. It says while you may consider this wrong, the what about the shopkeeper's shops or artisan's house sort of argument, it just says forget about it, capitalism has already destroyed that notion, and now only the rich have those luxuries. It also posits that capital has just completely replaced livelihood, and things like shops and houses, and now the proletariat need to take control of the state and the means of production. Now all capital, which is now conflated with private property, will belong only to the state, and by extension, the people. No longer will there be money, no longer will there be trading for goods, no longer will workers work to be exploited. Nobody will own anything, because everyone will own everything. There will be no private property, and when there is no private property, the bourgeoisie will cease to exist, and then we will have communism. It also says that the ability to educate your own children will be revoked, the state will do it, everyone will raise everyone's children, reminds me a lot of the rhetoric I see in Canada nowadays. It also says that borders and nationalities will be erased, which is a sharp departure from chapter 1, where they were talking about how hypercapitalism has eroded national identities. All will be one, and one will be all. It sounds like hell, How many villains are this exact motif? The Borg, the Cybermen, the New Phyrexians, the list goes on. It also has a scathing dismissal of religion, saying that concerns of communism coming from a philosophical or religious standpoint are, and I quote, not deserving of serious examination. They basically say that man's consciousness changes with every epoch, and it changes to reflect the views of the ruling class. It says that the feudal society was destroyed by the then revolutionary bourgeoisie, and that those ideals then took hold, and now the communists are here to do the same to them. It basically is saying that common man will adopt whatever the thoughts of the day are, and it is not worth engaging on that stage. It dismisses religion as being a false promise to keep man in line. In this chapter, it is posited that the bourgeoisie must be destroyed completely. To do this, the communists will need to infiltrate the government of the world and begin to destroy the bourgeoisie by using democracy against them. It basically wants mob rule that slowly takes control away from the ruling class and gives it to the people through use of things like labour unions, the destruction of the middle class, and the destruction of the family unit. It's just Bane from Dark Knight 3. It says these methods will be different by country, but the following will remain constant. The abolition of private property, with all land becoming used for public purpose. Bringing in a heavy graduated income tax, the abolition of rights of inheritance, confiscation of all property owned by emigrants and rebels, centralisation of credit in the hands of the state with a state-owned bank having a full monopoly, centralisation of the means of communication and transportation by the state. Side note here, this book is clearly written in British English, which is interesting, as it's using S's instead of Z's for words like centralise. Anyway, the state owns all factories and means of production, equal liability of all to labour, establishment of industrial armies, that's one rule, basically saying labour unions, the destruction of towns and cities, all will be spread equally over the country, and free education to all children, and they will no longer be allowed to work in factories. That last one's actually pretty good. We even adopted it in the West, so thanks, Marx.
What can I say except you're welcome?
But seriously, most of these things I think most people today would not want. Anyway, this chapter basically proves everything the boomers complained about communism for. All goodwill I had in chapter 1 was swiftly crushed by the end of chapter 2, but let's get on to chapter 3. Socialist and communist literature. This is just a basic list of various types of socialism and their associated ideals and literatures. The book criticises, I think, all of them, as they are all opposed to true communism in some way, shape or form. It includes feudal socialism, petty bourgeoisie socialism, German socialism, conservative socialism, critical utopian socialism and communism. This chapter's kind of boring and I didn't find amazingly relevant, but you can look up those individual things yourself if you're really interested in them. But anyway, the book then ends with chapter 4, the position of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. This final chapter talks about the parties the communists support in the present countries where it is taking root, which is not really relevant to anyone anymore as we aren't living in 1848 and the political landscape is completely different. However, at the very end, it says how the communists will support any and all revolutionary groups worldwide that oppose the status quo, and how they wish to destroy everything and replace it with communism. It ends with the two most famous lines from the manifesto: the proletariats have nothing to lose but their chains, and workers of all countries unite. So, what do I think of the manifesto? Well, I think it is a fascinating read. Really, really fascinating. It's a wonderful time capsule, and it is very interesting to see how the communists describe themselves. There's no bad faith here. This is from the communists for the bourgeoisie to tell them what they want and what they are after. Communists are very honest, at least in this period, and you can begin to tell who has and hasn't read this document very quickly in our modern day politics. I think that Marx and Engels' initial criticisms are well-founded, and that most people, even today, have issues with what they're criticising. You can either look at this, that these guys were way ahead of their time, or that nothing has changed in nearly 200 years. I think it's a bit of both. Aside from this, I find the whole ideology to be really imposing and unrealistic. It is antithetical to human nature. Humans desire competence and form hierarchies naturally. Communism will never and has never worked on a large scale. However, it does have a high chance of working on a small scale, in sort of co-ops, and unions are hella effective. But it's very ironic because the whole thing wants to unite the entire world. The main issue I can see with the book is that it says that this revolution is a long time coming, and that the revolutions always happen. However, it fails to address the obvious question of what happens when the people get tired with communism. What happens when the communists become the bourgeoisie, and then the people begin to rebel? As we see all over the world, communists by definition must oppose the status quo, but it doesn't say what happens when the status quo is communism. Maybe it is arrogant enough to believe that nobody will ever oppose it. Maybe it truly believes it will create the utopia everyone wants. But we just have enough evidence to prove at this stage that I just don't think it works. It's a product of its era, and I just don't think many people, even working class people, would even want communism anymore. The standard of living for even the poorest people in the West has risen so drastically that the entire thing just seems kind of irrelevant, but at the same time, every criticism it had in Chapter 1 is still a problem, so I don't know. And that was the Communist Manifesto. I'm not giving it a star rating or anything, but I would highly recommend checking it out. If you like history or politics, it's only like 70 pages. And if you liked this video, hit that subscribe button, and that like button, and that share button. You know, hopefully I'll be seeing you all again. See you next time.